Hi, I'm Janice Switlo, and I've been reviewing a book by George Woodcock, The Century That Made Us, Canada, 1814 to 1914. And I came across, in the context of a discussion between relations between French and English, and it's describing here French literature, and this is the remark I came across and want to speak to today. And that is, and this is a publication of a classic in Quebec that endures to this day, largely because it evokes so well in its description of seigneurial life in Canada at the time of the Conquest. Now remember, New France conquered by New England, if you will, in Canada, and then resulting French and English ways to get along. But nonetheless, a clear date of conquest that can be pointed to. In the case of Indigenous nations, there is no one set date of conquest. Now, the courts where there are no treaties have suggested that, not talking conquest, but said that the crown has asserted sovereignty as at time of contact, and they put that in BC, for instance, at 1846. Now, I want to be clear that this time of conquest is today. It is now. It will not be a set date. A lot of Indigenous nationals think, well, as long as we don't sign off on something, we'll be okay. Not so. The gathering of evidence to suggest you've abandoned or never were, or representations that you never were a nation, things like this, becomes a critical mass. It becomes a tipping point at some point where Canadian courts will be prepared to say, well, we don't have an exact date because we do not have one document, but we have all this evidence and all these things that were signed by those who purport to speak for Indigenous nationals. We had chief and council did this, and our chief said signed that, or lawyers went into court and said and represented this. All of that taken together, Canada will tell the world, means, we conquered the Indigenous nations. There's no longer any nations, and they've all come under Canada. They've all been reconciled into and under, read that, assimilation. And therefore, since the nations have fallen, so too the treaties fall. That time that Canada is trying to set the stage to be pointed at is now. Is this time, this generation. And I'm working diligently to counter that evidentiary record. But it's not enough for me to share my observations, because Canada can say, well, she wasn't privy. She wasn't at these secret tables where we got these things signed off. And that's true, right? But the Indigenous nationals have a clear role to play here, to say, I don't care what a chief signed, when and why and for what. The fact is, I, the Indigenous national, did not approve that. The chief does not carry my authorities. The chief only is an Indian Act chief, and I know a lot of people hate that terminology, but that's the fact, that the chief and council are defined creatures carrying authorities only under the Indian Act. Right now, what Canada is trying to get into place are all these different things that members of a band would pass to say, they're not just Indian Act chief and council, they also carry our original authorities. They speak for us, they can bind us, they can commit us, they can surrender us, they can assimilate us, all these kinds of things. So in this time of conquest that Canada hopes to achieve, it's critical for Indigenous nationals to set the record straight. And there's a variety of ways that can be done. It doesn't necessarily mean closing down economies, right? It is a matter of being clear as to who you are and how to communicate that clarity. But when people are speaking and acting and speaking as, using Section 35 terminology and assimilated ethnic minority terminology, it works against you. And so many people are being paid so much money, and really they're just digging the grave, right? And I have a hard time when I see that, right? I don't deny someone their fair wage. But please don't tell the world that you're protecting a nation when you're actually burying it. And that's all I have to say.